really at a point where there are unprecedented efforts to create a system of global governance. And I think the dichotomy that they're trying to make, and I again think it's a false dichotomy, is we can either have the current existing unipolar world order, Western dominated, or have this multipolar world order, which is going to be dominated by the BRICS countries. And of course, within BRICS, the dominant countries are Russia and China. And so the idea, it's being framed even, upon independent media. There's some people that claim that the multipolarity model is better because it's more inclusive and more countries have a voice. But ultimately, the same 2030 agenda or Agenda 2030, the Sustainable Development Goals embraced by the EU and the Biden administration, what have you, are also embraced by the BRICS countries that are supposed to represent a challenge to the Western order. So maybe there's a few more seats at the table under the multipolar world order, but in terms of the world that will come in through it, it's the same as if the unipolar world order continues on its way, essentially.
In the vast panorama of history, have you ever pondered over the constant shifts in geopolitical and economic landscapes? Could the rhythm of nations stepping forward and receding backward be the heartbeat of our world? Imagine a world where a single pole, a single authority, a single narrative shapes the global order. This, dear friends, was the unipolar world we once knew, where Western powers held sway over the global stage. This world was like a solo act, a single voice echoing in a grand auditorium. But what happens when the solo act becomes a choir of diverse voices? The transition from the unipolar world to the multipolar world is akin to the unfolding of an intriguing narrative. It's a story of power dynamics, of the rise and fall of nations, and of the silent forces shaping our future. Once upon a time, the world was a stage dominated by Western powers. They set the narrative, they ruled the roost, they were the single pole in a unipolar world. But the sands of time never ceased to shift. Enter the BRICS nations, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. As these nations gained economic and political prominence, the world began to pivot. The unipolar world started to give way to a multipolar future. But amidst this seismic shift, a fascinating phenomenon emerged. The diverse geopolitical entities, despite their differences, reached a consensus on Agenda 2030 and Sustainable Development Goals. It's as if the choir, despite singing different tunes, harmonized on a shared melody. This raises an intriguing question. Does a multipolar world indeed offer more inclusivity and representation, or is it merely a reconfiguration of power that ultimately serves similar ends? In this compelling narrative of global shifts, two key points stand out. First, the transition from a unipolar world to a multipolar future is a testament to the dynamic nature of global governance and economic models. Second, despite the diversity of geopolitical entities, there is a shared commitment to Sustainable Development Goals. But as the story unfolds, it leaves us with a tantalizing cliffhanger. Will the multipolar world be a stage of harmony and representation, or will it be another power play with different actors? As we delve into these questions, we continue to unravel the complex tapestry of our global narrative. In the grand scheme of things, the shift from a unipolar world to a multipolar future is not just about nations and power dynamics. It's about us, the inhabitants of this world, and how we navigate the shifting sands of geopolitics and economics. As we look towards the future, we're not just spectators, but active participants in this global story.
The Sustainable Development Goals have been developed essentially by bankers. You could describe it, or I would describe it, as a global Wall Street coup, essentially. Well, not necessarily Wall Street, but transnational finance. You have people like Mark Carney, former Goldman Sachs, former head of Bank of England, Bank of Canada, Financial Stability Board, aider and abetter of HSBC's money laundering for drug cartels. He's the person that's in charge of climate action for the United Nations. Their other point man is Mike Bloomberg, former Salomon Brothers, former mayor of New York, billionaire guy. And if you think these people care about the environment and sustainable development and building a more inclusive world, I'm sorry, but you have been had. Larry Fink is in this group too. And to think that he wants to make a more inclusive world is insane. He's interested in increasing the amount of assets that BlackRock manages, and pretty much only that. So these are the people that are essentially behind a lot of the net zero plans, behind a lot of the other SDG plans that essentially move us from the model, the free market capitalist model into more this technocratic model where, every commodity, everything is going to be tokenized. And you've seen Larry Fink in the past couple of days be very open about that following the approval of the BlackRock's Bitcoin ETF, for example, talking about the tokenization revolution and all of this. But there's an effort here to take this, much farther than it's ever been taken before, and to essentially just not just tokenize, existing assets or traditional assets, but also create new asset classes like natural assets, all these natural asset corporations that have sort of been in the news lately and have sort of, received some pushback, but there's definitely a lot of efforts underway to essentially tokenize the whole planet, increase the amount of assets in the existing economy by being like, now this lake is an asset, now this forest is an asset, and all of this stuff tokenize, fractionalize it, and basically create this insane new financial system that's different than previous financial systems, but everything, including nature and humans, will be tokenized and traded like financial products. And that's essentially what a lot of this is leading to. And you have most of the countries on the world, those that are pursuing Agenda 2030, essentially leading us into that. And so, at some level, I think the geopolitical push and pull between, BRICS and the West is real. But I think, at the higher levels, they ultimately agree on the goals. So I don't really think one is necessarily a true effective challenge to the other. And if you're against the ambitions of the SDGs and Agenda 2030, then you should be against them regardless of if they're being championed by Russia and China or the United States and the EU. Ultimately, it leads us to the same place, which is going to financialize and tokenize everything, but also surveil everything to an unprecedented extent. And increasingly uses, debt slavery. The Mark Carney and Fink and all of these guys, under the auspices of the UN, talked about reimagining the World Bank and the IMF, all the multilateral development banks, for the purpose of basically using debt to finance the SDGs and doing all these things like debt for climate swaps, debt for nature swaps, which are essentially, land grabs and all sorts of things, framing it as, necessary to save the planet. And maybe that justification works for the left, but I think it would be naive to assume that they aren't going to retool the talking points to appeal to the right. I think that's definitely going to be happening. And if you look at Fink himself, he's tried to go away from being the point man for ESG and all of this towards a guy that's saying like, look how profitable this is going to be for us. And you can have a part of the riches by tokenizing your land and putting it on this platform where it can be traded and whatever, like you can have a piece of all this wealth and whatever. I think that's how they're going to try and frame it. And I think people need to be very, very aware, because, the efforts to manipulate us to acquiesce to this system are unprecedented. And I think ultimately, if you have a good grasp of what they want to enact on the global stage, regardless of the justifications or the political figures they use or influencers and media that they try to use to sell this to you, if you are firm in your opposition to these agendas, then you'll be able to sort through the nonsense. Because as you said, all the stuff coming out online is increasingly just so psyop after psyop after psyop. And, it's hard to know who to trust and who to believe, what have you. But if you know that the end goal is global governance, mass surveillance, the end of privacy, all of that, you can look at who is pushing those agendas and say no. And ultimately, at the end of the day, you have to say no. You have to know what your red lines are, and you have to make it about trusting your red lines and trusting where you stand, not so much trusting this political savior or that political savior or this media influencer, which I think a lot of people have been doing. And I think it's definitely time for another model, particularly when it comes to US presidential politics, because how many times can we vote for the lesser of two evils and have a good outcome? It's never happened, and it's not going to keep happening. And, all all of these efforts, in the case of Trump, to like explain away his decisions last time and act like it's going to be different this time. We can't wait to see what's going to happen this time. The situation has come to a head arguably already, and it's up to people to find local solutions and build something with their communities that will help them protect, help everyone in that community protect themselves against all these stressors and crises that are to come. Because waiting for the right guy to get in the White House, regardless of who he is and whatever intention and motivation he has, one guy in the White House is not going to solve all of this, because arguably, the president is really a figurehead, because at this point, the US is so bureaucratic and massive. It doesn't really matter who gets elected, every 4 years in a November. The agenda is going to continue. And I think people need to really get wise about that. And particularly now where, presidential politics is pushed to the forefront of both mainstream and independent media, it's increasing. It really has been for some time a circus at the end of the day. And I think we should be paying attention to these really real issues and increasingly focus on solutions, which I think, finds very little airtime in independent media these days, which I think is definitely a trend I'd like to see reversed, because it's definitely time to start building something parallel to this Agenda 2030 stuff. Because a lot of the way this digital ID stuff, CBDCs or their private sector equivalents, are going to be forced onto the people is when, the food supply is under attack, or, there's some sort of crisis there. And the only way to get your rations is to follow the same model that's been rolled out by the UN's World Food Program, which is essentially the same model produced by Sam Altman's WorldCoin. Scan your eyeball and you have a digital ID tied to your eyeball in a digital wallet. And every time you check out, you scan your eyeball at the cash register, and it deducts the money of the cost of what you purchased from your, rations wallet. And if you don't submit to that system, you don't eat. And the World Food Program does this to millions of refugees every day in Ukraine, in the Middle East, and elsewhere. And the plan is to have this happen essentially everywhere. So people need to be very vigilant.
Have you ever pondered the question, is the global move towards sustainable development goals as altruistic as it seems? Today we are about to delve into this significant issue, shedding light on a shift from a free market capitalist model to a more technocratic one. This transition, driven by influential financial and political figures, suggests an economy where everything from natural resources to human activities could potentially be tokenized and traded. Such a financialization of every facet of life presents profound ethical, environmental, and social questions. Major figures like Mark Carney, Mike Bloomberg, and Larry Fink have been steering these initiatives. However, it begs the question, are the intentions behind these moves genuine? Is this push for a more sustainable and inclusive world authentic, or is it a mere facade for consolidating wealth and power among the elite? Moreover, the potential for increased surveillance and loss of privacy in this new economic model is a concern that cannot be pushed under the rug. The brilliant mind of Whitney Webb has illuminated the multifaceted challenges and dilemmas posed by our current trajectory towards Agenda 2030 and the broader aims of global governance. A world where every aspect of life is financialized, surveilled, and potentially controlled through digital means presents a scenario that demands our vigilant attention and critical examination. As we draw this discussion to a close, it's evident that the answers to these challenges won't be found in the corridors of power or the promises of political saviors. Instead, the path forward is paved with local, community-driven initiatives that empower individuals and groups to create sustainable, resilient systems outside the prevailing agenda. The importance of being informed, critical, and engaged has never been greater. As a part of the unscripted crypto community, your awareness and action can contribute to a collective effort towards a future that values freedom, privacy, and sustainability. We appreciate you joining us in this crucial conversation. Your support through likes, comments, and subscriptions enables us to continue bringing these insights to you. Thank you, and until next time, remain vigilant, remain critical, and remain engaged.